The book of 1 Samuel opens with the account of a man from the hill country of Ephraim named Elkanah during the period of the Judges. Now this should sound familiar. The two vignettes that concluded the book of Judges are about Levites who traveled to or are living in the hill country of Ephraim. These two vignettes in turn connect to the book of Ruth, which also occurred during the time of the Judges. And all four of these accounts involve a journey. In the account that opens the book of 1 Samuel, Elkanah's once barren wife Hannah gives birth to Samuel, who will become the last judge of Israel. So this account is also connected to the accounts of the other judges, especially that of Samson. The accounts of Samuel and Samson each begin with a barren woman and a miraculous birth. Also, both Samson and Samuel were set apart to God from birth, and both were given the task of delivering Israel from the Philistines. Chronologically, Samuel follows Samson as judge over Israel. And finally, all of these accounts point to the transition from the time of the Judges to the times of the kingdom. I'm Dan Cathcart, and this is the Promise of Rest. The two accounts that conclude the book of Judges occurred early in the period of Judges. They demonstrated how quickly the children of Israel turned away from God, breaking what Yeshua identifies as the two greatest commandments. Matthew 22:37-39. Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself." The third vignette, the book of Ruth, occurred late in the period of the Judges. It demonstrated that there was a remnant in Israel who followed the commandments and loved their neighbor as themselves. Now it culminated in the birth of a son named Obed, whose name, number 5744, means servant or worshiper. The fourth account, that of Elkanah and Hannah, demonstrated that there was a remnant in Israel who loved God with all their hearts. The account of Elkanah and Hannah, like that of Ruth, also culminates in the birth of a son. And together, these four vignettes form a chiasm, represented on one side the fall of the children of Israel, and on the other side the existence of a faithful remnant. Now, the outer layer of the chiasm begins with the first account, where a Levite named Jonathan, the grandson of Moses, becomes a priest dedicated to the worship of an idol. The other layer concludes with the fourth account, where Hannah dedicates the Levite Samuel to service to God. The second layer of the chiasm contains the central theme, where the men of Gilboa become like Sodom. They deny hospitality to a Levite and abuse and kill his concubine. The second half of this layer is the third account, where Boaz demonstrates his love for his neighbor by taking care of the widows Naomi and Ruth. He becomes their kinsman, redeemer, and the father of Obed. The central theme of the chiasm is that those who worship God with all their hearts will naturally love their neighbor as themselves. Now we begin the account of Elkanah, Hannah, and Samuel by placing it in its historical context. The last judge in the book of Judges was Samson. In Judges 13:5, God said that Samson would begin to deliver the children of Israel from the Philistines. Samuel was probably born during Samson's time as judge or just prior to it. Now in 1 Samuel, we pick up the chronology of Judges. 1 Samuel 1:1 and 2. Now there was a certain man of Ramathaim, Sophim, of the mountains of Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jotham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. And he had two wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other was Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. It appears that Elkanah is from the tribe of Ephraim. However, we need to remember that the Levites had cities in each of the 12 tribal lands. They were frequently called by the name of the tribe in which they lived. For example, the Levite Jonathan in Judges 17:9 identifies himself as belonging to the tribe of Judah. The genealogy of Levi, given in 1 Chronicles 6:25 and 26, identifies Elkanah and his son Samuel as Levites from the line of Kohath, who had been given cities in the tribal land of Ephraim. Elkanah had 2 wives, one of which, Peninnah, had children. However, Hannah was barren. As may be expected, Peninnah mocked Hannah because of her barrenness. This sets up a similar situation to that of Jacob, who had 2 wives, Rachel and Leah. Leah had children, but Rachel did not. Elkanah, unlike the Levite Jonathan, followed God's Torah and went up to the house of the Lord in Shiloh 3 times each year. The account tells us about one particular time each year when Elkanah went up to Shiloh, 1 Samuel 1, 3-5. This man went up from his city yearly to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. Also the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord, were there. This is the first time in the Bible that Jehovah is described as Jehovah of hosts or armies. The Zondervan NIV Study Bible comments on this first appearance of this title. It now becomes prominent at the onset of monarchy in Israel. The title, the Lord of Hosts, is perhaps best understood as a general reference to the sovereignty of God over all the powers of the universe. Now, in contrast to the first appearance of the name Lord of Hosts, we learn that Eli's sons Hophni and Phinehas would later desecrate the offerings that were brought before the Lord. Elkanah gave his wives and his sons and daughters portions to give as offerings to the Lord of Hosts. Each of the members of the family brought offerings individually to the Lord. 1 Samuel 1, 4-7. And whenever the time came for Elkanah to make an offering, he would give portions to Peninnah, his wife, and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah, although the Lord had closed her womb. And her rival provoked her severely to make her miserable, because the Lord had closed her womb. So it was, year by year, when she went up to the house of the Lord, that she provoked her. Therefore she wept and did not eat. Now these offerings would have been offered to the Lord as peace offerings, which were a shared meal with God and the one who brings the offering in gratitude for God's kindness, mercy, and provision. However, Hannah could not participate in the shared meal because Peninnah mocked her about her childless status, reminding her of her grief and making her miserable. Deuteronomy 12:7 states that when anyone brings an offering and eats before the Lord, they are to rejoice for the blessings that God had given them. This situation suggests that the particular feast referred to here may be the Feast of Sukkot, when, according to Deuteronomy 16:14, all Israel was to appear before the Lord and rejoice. Elkanah urged Hannah to eat and rejoice because God had given him to her. However, she was unable to do so. 1 Samuel 1, 8-9. Then Elkanah, her husband, said to her, "Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? Why is your heart grieved? Am I not better to you than 10 sons?" So Hannah arose after they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli, the priest, was sitting at the seat by the doorpost of the tabernacle of the Lord. After the rest of the family had completed their offering and eaten before the Lord, Hannah approached the tabernacle where the high priest Eli was sitting at the doorway. She prayed silently out of her heart for God to give her a male child. 1 Samuel 1, 10-12. And she was in bitterness of soul, and prayed to the Lord, and wept in anguish. Then she made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a male child, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall come upon his head. And it happened, as she continued praying before the Lord, that Eli watched her mouth. In the book of Ruth, Naomi describes herself as bitter. These two situations are similar. Naomi lost her husband and sons, and Hannah had no sons. Hannah prayed to the Lord of hosts. This is the first instance in the Bible that a person addressed God using this name. Hannah vowed that if God would give her a male child, she would give him back to God. He would be a type of Nazirite from birth, in that he would be dedicated to the service of the Lord, and no razor would touch his head. The judge at this time was probably Samson, who was a Nazirite from birth as commanded by the Lord. The only other Nazirite from birth in the Bible is John the Baptist, who announced and prepared the way of the coming of Yeshua, the King. The male child that God would give Hannah prepared the way for the formation of the kingdom of Israel. The high priest, Eli, observed Hannah praying. But since she did not speak out loud, he thought that she had approached God in a drunken state, which was forbidden. Now when Hannah explained the anguish of her soul that she had poured out before the Lord, Eli blessed her and said that God would grant her request. 1 Samuel 1, 17-18. Then Eli answered and said, Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition which you have asked of him. And she said, Let your maidservant find favor in your sight. So the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. Hannah was finally able to bring her offering to the Lord and to eat before the Lord with rejoicing. When Elkanah and his family returned to Ramah, God quickly answered Hannah's prayer and opened her womb. 1 Samuel 1, 19-20. Then they rose early in the morning and worshipped before the Lord, and returned and came to their house at Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. So it came to pass in the process of time that Hannah conceived and bore a son, and called his name Samuel, saying, Because I have asked for him from the Lord. Hannah says that she named her son Samuel because she asked for him. Now we would expect that Samuel would mean asked for. However, the name Samuel reflects the answer to Hannah's request. Samuel's number 8050 means heard of God. Hannah's request was heard of God, and he granted her request. Hannah did not return to the house of the Lord until Samuel could appear before the Lord and begin his lifelong service to God. 1 Samuel 1, verse 22. But Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, Not until the child is weaned, then I will take him, that he may appear before the Lord and remain there forever. When Samuel was weaned, Hannah and Elkanah took him up to the Lord with her offering in fulfillment of her vow. 1 Samuel 1, 24-25. Now when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, with 3 bulls, 1 ephah of flour, and a skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord in Shiloh. And the child was young. Then they slaughtered a bull and brought the child to Eli. Hannah and Elkanah then sacrificed a bull as a dedication offering, consecrating Samuel to service to the Lord. Hannah explained that Samuel was the child that she had asked for, and that she had asked that he be allowed to serve the Lord all his days. The Young's literal translation conveys the emphasis that Samuel was God's response to Hannah's request. 1 Samuel 1, 27-28. For this youth I prayed, and Jehovah doth give to me my petition, which I asked of him. And also I have caused him to be asked for Jehovah. All the days that he hath lived, he is asked for Jehovah, and he boweth himself before Jehovah. Hannah's explanation ends with the statement that he bowed himself before Jehovah. Who bowed himself? This is probably Elkanah, because he is the one, along with Hannah, who brought the offering of the bull and dedicated his son to the service of God. However, some commentators say that Samuel was the one who bowed himself before Jehovah. Hannah, who had prayed silently in anguish the last time she appeared before the Lord, prayed out loud in a song of praise and thanksgiving to God. 1 Samuel 2, 1 and 2. And Hannah prayed and said, My heart rejoices in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. I smile at my enemies because I rejoice in your salvation. No one is holy like the Lord, for there is none beside you, nor is there any rock like our God. The placement of songs in the Bible frequently marks high points or transitions. For example, the Song of Moses and Miriam after the crossing of the Red Sea marks Israel's official crossing out of slavery and into the freedom of worshiping God, as well as the completion of God's judgment against Egypt. Then, the next song recorded in the Bible is the Song of Moses, just before Moses turns the leadership of Israel over to Joshua, and the children of Israel cross the Jordan River and enter the Promised Land. This Song of Hannah's signals the beginning of Israel leaving the time of judges and entering the era of kings. Hannah's song, located at the beginning of the book of Samuel, has a counterpart at the end of the books of Samuel in David's song of praise. Look at 2 Samuel 22, 2 and 3. And he, David, said, The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, the God of my strength, in whom I will trust, my shield and my horn of my salvation, my stronghold and my refuge, my Savior. You save me from violence. The beginnings of both Hannah and David's songs start with the same theme, that of relying on God's strength, indicated by the imagery of a horn, the statement that He is their rock, and the acknowledgement that God is their salvation. The Zondervan NIV Study Bible comments on the significance of Hannah and David's songs. These two songs frame the main narrative, and their themes highlight the ways of God that the narrative relates. They contain the theology of the book in the form of praise. Hannah speaks prophetically at a time when Israel is about to enter an important period in its history, with the establishment of kingship through her son Samuel. The body of Hannah's song explains that God's ways are not man's ways. God humbles the proud and exalts the humble. The barren woman is blessed with children, and the woman with children pines away. God kills and makes alive. He raises the poor and brings down the rich. Hannah concludes with the assurance that God will protect His saints, the holy ones, and prophesies the coming of the anointed king. 1 Samuel 2, 9 and 10. He will guard the feet of His saints, but the wicked shall be silent in darkness. For by strength no man shall prevail. The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken in pieces. From heaven He will thunder against them. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to His king and exalt the horn of His anointed. Hannah prophesies about a king that will rule over Israel. This is primarily about David, whose song joins hers at the end of the book of Samuel. However, Matthew Henry comments on how this prophecy also looks forward to the coming of the Messiah. This prophecy looks to the kingdom of Christ, that kingdom of grace of which Hannah speaks after having spoken largely of the kingdom of providence. And here is the first time that we meet with the name Messiah or His anointed. The subjects of Christ's kingdom will be safe, and the enemies of it will be ruined, for the anointed, the Lord Christ, is able to save and to destroy. The Song of David ends with the same promise of the coming of the anointed king that will come from his descendants, 2 Samuel 22, 50 and 51. Therefore I will give thanks to you, O Lord, among the Gentiles, and sing praises to your name. He is the tower of salvation to His king, and shows mercy to His anointed. to David and his descendants forevermore. After Hannah's song of praise, she and Elkanah returned to Ramah. 1 Samuel 2, verse 11. Then Elkanah went to his house at Ramah, but the child ministered to the Lord before Eli, the priest. Samuel remained in Shiloh, where he stayed with Eli, the high priest, and began his lifelong service to the Lord. This account of the birth of Samuel, like the account of the birth of Obed and Ruth, ended with praise and worship of God. Remember, Obed's name means servant and worshiper, and Samuel, whose name means heard of God, was dedicated to lifelong service and worship of God. Hannah prophesied that a king would be anointed to rule over Israel. That king would be David, the grandson of Obed. So these two accounts about the remnant of Israel who continued to serve God with all their hearts points to the coming of the kingdom, and ultimately to the kingdom of God through the King Yeshua. I'm Dan Cathcart for Moed Ministries International. Shalom and be blessed.